Hello class, welcome. So let's actually get started with our project. So here on my desktop, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call that Reddit. Reddit as in the verb read in the past, and open that with VS Code. And here I'm going to start by setting up TypeORM because it helps us set up some other stuff as well. So I'll open the terminal and make sure to have TypeORM installed in globally. And if you don't, make sure to run npm install -g type ORM like that. And that will give us access to the CLI as well. So once you install that, I'm going to control out C because I already have it. I'm going to say TypeORM init. And by default, it uses MySQL, but I want to use Postgres. So here I'm going to override it and say --database Postgres. If you're using MySQL, you don't need to add that option. All right, cool. So it created some files for us. So here, if we check in the source directory, we have, first let's start with this entity. It creates this user entity, which is basically a model. In TypeORM, models are called entities. And here it has some basic fields. One of them is the primary generated ID, and that increments on its own, obviously. And here, don't mind this red squiggly because it initializes the project, but it hasn't installed the dependencies yet. So TypeScript cannot find this. So we'll install it in a moment. And here we have these other fields. And notice we use decorators in TypeORM. So here we denote a column, which tells TypeORM that this is not just a TypeScript property of this class. It's actually a column in the database. So if we go to this index.ts, which is our entry file, which actually I'm going to rename to server.ts because it makes more sense because it's actually a server. We get squiggly lines under the console. I think this is just a TypeScript version thing. So let's ignore it for a second. So we import a reflect metadata, which is something that you just need to import and include as soon as possible in your TypeORM project. And we get this create connection here, which does exactly that. It creates a connection to the database. And after that, it performs any operation. And here we're importing our user model, and we are creating a user instance and persisting that in the database right here. We're calling connection.manager.save user. If you want to know about TypeORM, I have a tutorial for that that's linked in the first video, and I think I'll link it here as well. I'm not going to explain very deep like TypeORM stuff, just to kind of save a little bit of time. I'm going to explain all the other stuff, don't worry. So I'm actually gonna, I'm gonna keep that as it is. Let's go. We have this ORM config we need to change here. So here we have our type of connection, that's fine, it's Postgres, the host, that's fine, the port. I'm gonna change the username, the password to match mine. So I have my username is classed and the password is root. Make sure to put yours here. And the database is called Reddit, like that. And I'm gonna create this in a second. Let's leave synchronize to true. This basically logs all the SQL that is executed to the console. And actually, no, that's logging. Synchronize creates database tables based on the models that you have. And every time you change your models or entities, I should start to get used to say entities, it creates and it updates your tables in the database. And here we have entities, which tells TypeORM where to find entities. I'm actually going to rename this to entities because it makes more sense. And I'm going to rename it down here as well so that the CLI will know where to find the entities. I'm going to rename migration to migrations here. Same for subscribers and same right here as well. So save that. Make sure to rename the folder. So entities. And make sure that in the server it's actually updated that import statement. And here let's go to the package.json and let's actually update the start script that we get here to actually run the server.ts instead of the index.ts. Now notice here we have some outdated packages. I think these three are all not like super outdated, so I'm gonna update them. So let's go to the console and let's say npm install or just I actually. So we have ts node and TypeScript and node types. So say ts-node at latest. Same thing for node types. So type/node at latest and TypeScript at latest. There's probably a package that does this, but anyway, it's just three of them. All right, so I'm actually gonna run now npm install to install the rest of the dependencies. So npm install, run that. And actually there's this other package that you need to install that is very important, which is to like this video right now, and I'll give you a moment to install it. Cheers. Okay, so let's go back to our project. And here if we go, so here we have a basic TS config. Let's not worry too much about it. It just basically tells TypeScript what kind of like JavaScript we're writing, or like, and then here it tells it where to build it to, which is just to the build. And here it tells it that we need to use decorators because we need to use decorators in TypeORM. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close this as well. And here in the server, so here we create a connection and we create a user. So let's actually test if this is working. Let's open the terminal. I'm going to open a new terminal window, and I'm going to open PSQL to create that database. So here I'll type my password, and here I'll say create database Reddit. Oops, Reddit, like that. All right, cool. So that's created. So now I'm going to run npm start, which is going to start our server. All right, cool. So, okay, so I forgot to change logging to true. So here I want it to log to the console. But yeah, it created that user, and here it actually printed it to the console. And if we go back to check and I'm going to connect to that database, Reddit, and here if we do \dt, we see that we have a user table. If we do select star from user, and we get Postgres users. Okay, so that name needs to change because it's a conflict with an actual table in Postgres. So here in the user entity, let's change this. Inside the entity decorator call, we're gonna say users, which tells TypeORM to name the table like this. And now if we do npm start, it should create this table again. All right, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does create that table, and it inserts the this new user again. So if I go back to the other terminal, actually it creates the new table, but it doesn't delete the old table. So I'm just gonna delete the sequence, which should take care of deleting the table. So delete sequence and sequence, and that's user underscore ID underscore sequence, like that. I'm actually gonna add cascade so it doesn't error on me. Actually, my bad, it's not delete, it's drop. Okay, drop. Cool, it dropped the sequence, and no, it actually doesn't drop the table. Yeah, it doesn't drop the table. Okay, I'm just gonna drop the table. Okay, I need to use quotation marks. Cool. So we do select star from users, and we run that. There we go. We get actually our user has been entered in the database. Cool. So if we go back to our server TS, I'm actually gonna get rid of this because obviously we don't want to create users like this. And I'm gonna get rid of user, and let's actually install Express so we can set up our routes and our Express app. So let's go back to our terminal, and here let's say npm install Express, run that. I'm gonna install Express types, so actually do dash uppercase D as a dev dependency, types / Express. And also I'm going to install Morgan to log all the API requests that we send, and also at types / Morgan, and hit enter and close that. So here, let's go here and import Express. So import Express from Express, and here I'll say, okay, we'll get a red squiggly. Declare the, oh, okay, that's fine. It's just an unused error. So here we'll say const app equals Express. And here we'll say app.use. I'm going to use the JSON middleware so that we pass our JSON body requests. Okay, we still get a squiggly. Okay, so this doesn't have a default export. I'm just going to add this flag. This always gets me. So here in the TS node, or TS config, let's add this ES module into op and say it's true and save. And that should be gone. Okay, let me just restart TS server. Cool. Okay, so that red squiggly is gone. And here I'll say app. Actually, remind me we need to import Morgan. So let's import Morgan from Morgan, like that. And here we'll say app.use Morgan, and I'm gonna pass it dev. I like the dev setting. It's nice. It's got the colors as well. So here I'll say app.get. And I'm gonna set up a basic, kind of like a test route. So here, this will take a request and a response, and they will return. We'll just return. I'm just gonna say res.send, and it's gonna say hello world. And now let's start listening. So let's do app.listen, I'm gonna just pass it a number for now, like for the port. We'll set up the environment later. And as a callback, I'm gonna make this async and say async do arrow function. And here I'll console log server running at http://localhost:5000. And underneath this, I'll do a try catch block. And if we get an error, I'm just gonna console log it. And if you don't, we'll say await create connection. And then after the connection is created, we'll console log and say database connected. And here if we get an error, I'm just gonna console log it. Let's just say CLG. And by the way, I'm using what is it called? This thing, ES7 React Redux blah 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 snippets, and it gives us some nice snippets that we can use to save time from typing everything. All right, so let's actually run our server, make sure that it's working, nothing broke. So let's say npm start. And in new tab, I'm going to say, cool, okay, we get database connected. Let's say curl localhost 5000, run that. Cool, we get hello world. And here we get / and that was a 200 response. And this is Morgan login for us. So that's a nice tool that as well we have in store. Okay, so let's start by creating routes where users can register and can log in as well. So I'm going to create this in its own file. So let's go to the source directory, create a new file, routes/auth.ts. I would call it users, but we'll have some other users routes later. So here I'm going to create a register a register handler. So let's create a arrow function, and this will be register, and this will take a request. And actually, let's get the types from, I think it should import it for us. So request like that. There we go, request from Express, and also we'll have response, and that's of type response like that. And by the way, here, I didn't actually import them or from Express because they're inferred already, because we passed them like that to the get. So here, if you hover, you see that it already knows the type. And by the way, this request is not used, so we can omit it like that. So we go back to our auth. So we get a request and a response. So we're gonna get some input in the body of the request. So let's actually destructure from it. So we're supposed to get an email, a username, and a password. And it's gonna be from request.body. And why I'm just doing password is that we can do confirm password and password on the client side. We don't need to do that on the server as well. And by the way, I'm going to change this to async because we need to use async await. So here, let's do our try catch block. And I'm just going to change that to error like that. I'm going to put some comments here. So we'll do to do validate data. So this includes like making sure that this user doesn't exist and this input is not empty. And here next, we're going to say to do create the user. And then last thing is we return the user. And actually, I'm going to create the router here. So we'll say const router equals router. Will it import it? Yes, router from Express. And here we'll say router.get, or actually, sorry, .post. And this will be to /register. And the handler for this will be the register function that we created right there. And here we're gonna export default router. So actually, let's first include this in the server, and then we're gonna come back. So here in the server, we'll say import or auth routes from same directory routes/auth. And underneath here, we'll say app.use because I wanna prefix it with /API/auth. And here, let's pass the auth routes like that. And that should actually add them. So before we do any validation, I'm just gonna make a quick route that actually creates the user. So here we'll say const user equals new user. And now that imports it from our entities. And I'm gonna separate these because you always separate relative imports from absolute imports. It's just a convention. And here we can say user.email equals. Actually, I don't like you doing this because if you have a lot of fields, you're gonna do it a lot. So what I'm gonna do is we could use user like this, user.create like that, and pass the fields. But for me, this is a bit confusing because I'm used to this being an ORM thing. So I'm just gonna create a constructor, and so here in the user entity, Let's create a constructor, and excuse me, and the constructor will take a user, and the type of the user will actually be a partial of this user. Now, the difference is when you say a partial, that means like some of the fields can be nullable, because otherwise, if you just say user, it's going to require us to add as well like other fields that we don't actually create ourselves. So here we'll say object.assign, and we'll assign this instance of the object. We're going to assign it this user that we are passed in. And here we'll go, actually we need to as well extend from base entity so that we can use the active record approach. So here actually inside the constructor, I'm going to say super, because we're inheriting from base entity. I'm going to call the original constructor. So here we'll say new user, and we can actually now use the constructor to pass the data. So here we can just pass email, username, and password like that. Okay, it says I'm going to touch it, it's not assignable. Okay, did I not add email? Oh, okay, my bad. I actually didn't change these fields yet. So here, I'm going to remove all those fields and then add new fields. So here we'll say column, email, and this will be of type string. And then we'll have another one, column, and this will be the username. And this will be of type string. And we're going to have the password as well, column, password, and that's of type string. And we can as well specify some extra stuff here, because we want the email to be unique across users. So we can specify some options, and we'll say unique, set to true. And the same thing goes for the username. Both of them need to be unique across users. So let's add unique true here as well. So if we save that, I was wondering actually why I wasn't getting IntelliSense. So actually here we should get, so we should get IntelliSense like that. We should get autocomplete, that it suggests to for us which fields to add. I'm gonna add username. Okay, so now this is not enough obviously to persist the user, so we need to say await user.save to actually save the user in the database. And here let's say return res.json user. And here if we get an error, I'm just gonna console log it, console log error, and then say return res.status 500.json, and we'll just say error, error, something went wrong. Or actually I'm gonna actually pass the error while in development and later change it to that. So error like that. Cool, so save that, and actually now we have to restart the server, which reminds me, let's install nodemon. So let's say npm install -d nodemon. So now we don't have to keep restarting it. So let's go to our package.json, and in the scripts I'm gonna add a dev script here. So let's add dev, and here we'll say nodemon --exec, and it's gonna execute ts-node source/server.ts. Alright, save that, and now if we say npm run dev, it should run it with nodemon, and it does. Okay, so we get an error, and that's column email contains null values. Okay, so this is because we already had an object in the database in the users table. So I'm just gonna say delete from users, and then restart that, and that should now sync the database perfectly. Cool. So it actually added that column, and now if we check back in the users table and we describe it, so \d users, we see that we have an email and we have a username and a password, and also we have our unique constraints as well. Cool. Actually, one thing I was meant to add and I forgot is go back to our entity, and I want to add here at index, which adds an index at this on these fields, which improves performance when actually querying the database. So when I've saved that, it should have already synced it. So let's check. All right, cool. That's synced. So we have our indices here. Cool. So if we go ahead and open a HTTP client, so I'm going to open Insomnia. You can use Postman as well. So here, let's actually send a request to, so a post request to localhost 5000/API/users, or /auth rather. And here in the JSON body, let's create a object with a field email. And here I'll say John at email, my favorite email to use. And for the username, it will be just John, and then we'll have a password, and that will be 1 2 3 4 5 6 because that's the most secure password you can have. Okay, it says cannot post to /API/auth. Okay, let me check why that's the case. Oh, my bad, /auth/register, of course. All right, cool. So we get 200 success, and we get our user with the ID as well. Actually, this reminds me, let's create timestamps because we might need them in the future. So here we'll say at create date column, which is a nice utility that we get from TypeORM. And here we give it a name. I'm just gonna give it created at, and this is of type date. And let's do the update as well. So update date column, and this will be updated at, and this will be of type date. Now save that, and now if we go back to Insomnia, and now let's create, actually if we run this, yeah, we get duplicate key, that's cool, so our unique constraint is working. And if we now change this to Jane, run that, cool, we get Jane, and Jane has timestamps as well, so that's cool. Of course, now if we actually give empty values, it's going to create it because there's no validation in place. And for validation, TypeORM, they recommend to use class validator. So let's actually install that. So let's say, oops, not here, here. Let's say npm install class-validator. Hit enter. And here, inside the entity, we can use them as decorators. So here where we have our email, we can say at is email, and that will import it automatically for us from class validator. And here for username, I'm gonna say is there minimum min? Yeah, min. So I'm gonna make it min 3 characters, and here for the password, I'm gonna copy that and give it min of 6 characters. Save that. And now I'm going to go back to the auth. So actually one thing that we need to change as well, because even if we validate, I'll show you. Okay, let's validate. So I'm going to import from class validator the actual function validate. And here where we have our user, where we create it, before we save it, we can run the validate on it. So we can say const errors equals await, because it's asynchronous, validate, and then we pass it our user like instance. And here we'll say if, and we check if the users, if the errors have a length more than 0, then we need to return those errors. So if we get an array of errors, so we can check the length of it. So we'll say if errors.length is bigger than 0, we'll say return res.status 400.json, and we're just gonna return those errors like that instead of an object. Else we carry on. So let's save that. And let's check if that's working. So run this. All right, cool. So we get an array of errors, and the first one is for the property email, and it says email must be an email. And of course it's bypassing that it's empty because we didn't add anything. And if it's empty, of course it's not a valid email, so we can just keep it like that. And for username, it says it must be at least 3 characters. And for the password, it says must not be less than 6. You can customize these messages as well. So you can go to the user entity, and here where we have min, we can add another object, and here it has a message property, and we can say what is this, username must be at least 3 characters long, and save that. And now if we run this, we get for username must be at least 3 characters long. Cool. You can add the other messages. I'm not too concerned about validation right now. What I'm more concerned about is, so if we pass a valid username, we can say user like that. It's gonna pass, actually, does it trim? Wait, does it trim strings? Let's check. User. Okay, so you see in our target here, you see that it didn't trim the string. So we need to add a sort of way for us to trim all of the stuff that we get in the body, all of the variables that we get from the user. So obviously we can trim these on each route, but I'm going to create a middleware for this. So up here, actually I'm going to put it in its own file. So let's go in our root or in our source directory. Let's say middleware /trim. .ts. So here we'll say export default arrow function with a request of type request. Import that from Express, and then response of type response. And also, because this is middleware, we need to do a next as well of type next function. And now here, what we need to do is we need to loop through all of the request body keys. So we'll say object.keys, keys of request dot body dot for each. And now for each key, we're gonna do something. And here we'll say, actually, we could get a key that is not a string as an object. So we need to check for the type of the key. So we'll say if type of key, or actually, sorry, if type of a request dot body, and then do like that key, because when we're checking the value, not the key itself, equals string, then we actually want to trim it. So we'll say here request dot body key equals request dot body, and then do that access key dot trim like that. Actually, I'm going to add one thing, because we don't want to trim passwords as well, because, you know, a password can have empty space and that's part of the password. So one thing that we can add here, we can add an array of exceptions. So we'll say exceptions equals. So I'm setting it up like this, so that if you want to extend this, you can add, like if you want to validate confirm password, you can add it here. So here we can say if not exceptions dot includes, and we'll pass key, because we're checking the name of the key, and the type of the value of the key is a string, then we actually trim it. And then once we're done with this loop, we just call next. Save that, and now let's actually go back to our server and use that globally. So here we'll say import trim from same directory middleware / trim, and here before any route we need to use it, so we'll say app.use trim like that. Save that, and now if we go back to Insomnia, and we can say here email like that, and with all white spaces, run that. There we go. You see that it's validating, and then the target that it received had an email of email and username of username, and it actually trimmed the white space, and it didn't do that on the password. So our middleware is working perfectly, and so is our validation. Obviously so far, because we need to add some more in the validation. So we're validating, we're trimming the strings, we're validating that it's of the requested or of the set length and so on. We need to also validate that these email and username don't exist in the database. So we can actually fetch users with those credentials to see if they exist. So here we can say const email user equals await user dot find one, and then here the condition will be email like that. And then we'll repeat that, and here will be username user, and here will be user dot find one by username. And now we check for them. So we say if email user, actually let's create an errors object here. We'll say let, because we want to return something, we'll say let errors equals an empty object like that. Let's give it a type of any, so that it doesn't complain later when we want to add something. So here we'll say if email user, that means if this user exists, we'll say errors dot email equals email is already taken. And let's repeat that, and then do the same for username. So here username, if username user, errors dot username equals username is already taken. Okay, it's complaining because we have errors here, so we can remove the const here. We can just assign it a new value right there. And here we can just check if these exist. Let's not carry on with the rest of the validation. So here we'll say if objects or object dot keys of, because this is an object, dot keys of errors dot length is bigger than 0, then we have some errors, so we return them. So let's say return res dot status 400 dot json, and we pass those errors. All right, save that, and let's see if that's working. So in our database, let's check. Select star from users. So yeah, we have a user john@email.com. So let's check for that. So let's check the validation. So we can say here for email, john@email.com, and then the same for username, John, run that. Okay, cool. So we get email is already taken. Same for username. If I change the username to John's, cool, we get only for the email. And if I change the email to an email that doesn't exist, cool. So it carries on and does the rest of the validation. So we get a username must be at least 3 characters long. Okay, I think I know what I did. Okay, so I think this yeah, this is for numbers. My bad. I should use the other one, the length. Yeah, length. So this is actually for checking the length of a string. And it takes a minimum and a maximum. I don't care too much about the maximum right now, so I'm just gonna say 3 here, and then change this to length. And that's actually not, this is the password. This is 6, and that's the length. And actually length takes a minimum and a maximum, and then options. So we can't pass options as second. So I'll pass undefined as second as a maximum. Or we can pass 255, which is kind of like the varchar maximum in SQL. And I'm going to remove min from here because you don't need it anymore. So let's save. And now that validation should work. So run this. Cool. So we get our user John's, and the password, which of course we need to hash because we don't want to store passwords as plain text. And of course we're going to hide it as well from the return object. So let's go back. We can actually add this inside of the user model. So we need to install the bcrypt package to encrypt or to hash our password. So in the terminal, let's say npm install bcrypt. Now install the types as well. So npm install -d at types/bcrypt. I like to separate the types and the dependencies because when you go to the package.json, it's just easier to read when all the types are up there. So let's go back to the user, and here I'll use at before insert, which is kind of like a lifecycle hook. Before a record is created in the database, you operate something on your model. And here we'll have a function. You can name this anything. And this will be async actually, because the hash function is asynchronous. So here we'll say async hash password. This name doesn't matter. And here we'll say, so we're receiving in our handler, we're receiving the password inside of the user. And then here when we attempt to save, before we save, let's hash that password. So we'll say, actually we can straight away bind it. So we'll say this.password equals await bcrypt. We need to import that. So up here we'll say import bcrypt, and here we'll say await bcrypt.hash, and we'll pass it our password. So this.password, and we'll give it 6 rounds. All right, save that. And now let's go back to Insomnia, and now let's create a user for Jane though. So Jane, username is Jane, and the password is actually 1 through 6. Run that. Okay, Jane is already taken. Okay, interesting. So Jane 2, run that. Cool, so we get Jane 2 and we get the password and it's actually hashed. So that's the hashing is working. One other thing as well, we want to hide the password and the ID from the response. So for this, we're going to use class transformer, which is a library that kind of transforms objects into other objects and hides and shows properties that we want it to. So let's say npm install class -transformer. Hit enter, and here I'm gonna import some stuff from it in the user entity. So class transformer. What is it actually? Class as plain or something like that. Class to plain, and the other one I think is hide. No, exclude. Exclude. So here inside of our model or our entity, so for the password we can just add the stack the other decorator exclude like that, and same thing goes for the ID, so exclude here, and then here we can override the toJSON method, so toJSON, and here we'll say return class to plain this, and this should work. So this class to plain actually does the transformation of the model, and then it goes through, and then if a field has the exclude decorator, it actually hides it. So let's test if that's working. I'm gonna create another user 123, user 123, run that. Cool. So we get our data and our password, and the ID is actually hidden from us. So that's actually working. I want to do the login and the rest of the auth stuff, but this video is getting really long, so I'm just gonna have to stop it here. And yeah, please do make sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't yet. So I will see you in the next one. Cheers.